Hello, my name is Matthew Goody, and I'm going to be talking about solar eclipses. For this presentation, I found an article titled When is October's Partial Solar Eclipse and Who Can See It on Space.com. This article covers the basics of what a solar eclipse is, when the next one is happening, and where in the world it will be visible. Chapter 4 is about space navigation, and there are a plethora of things that fall under this topic. Whenever we think about navigating through space, it is important to consider the position of the Earth in the solar system in relation to the objects around it. The closest object that falls into this category is the Moon. Later in Chapter 4, we are going to discuss how moon phases are one way of measuring the passage of time and the position of the Moon. While the Moon is going through these phases every 29.5 days, solar eclipses can occur with the right conditions. First, let's start with what a solar eclipse is. A solar eclipse occurs when the Moon passes in between the Sun and the Earth. This causes the Moon's shadow to be cast onto the Earth. Based on the time of year and the position of the Moon, the size of the eclipse can vary widely. While we may often think of the Moon completely blocking the Sun when we hear the word eclipse, solar eclipses can either fully or partially block the light from the Sun. Unfortunately, a solar eclipse will never be visible from the entire planet. Because the Moon is so much smaller than the Earth, the shadow will only be a couple hundred miles in diameter at most. This means that only people within that shadow are able to witness any given eclipse. A solar eclipse can take many different forms, but there are three main types of eclipses. The first and most commonly thought of eclipse is a total eclipse. This is when the Moon will completely block the light from the Sun. These are actually very rare though, and only occur once about every 18 months. This can vary though. The next kind of eclipse is an annular eclipse. This occurs when the Moon appears to be centered in the Sun. However, during this kind, the Moon's shadow is not quite large enough to completely block the Sun. The result of this is that we will be able to see the outer ring of the Sun shining through. The final kind of eclipse is a partial eclipse. This is when the Moon only partially covers the Sun, and this is the most common form. So when is the next solar eclipse? There will actually be a partial solar eclipse on October 25th of this year. Unfortunately, it will not be visible from anywhere in the US. In fact, even from the places that will be able to see it, the size of the eclipse will be different based on where you are. For example, on October 25th, 82% of the sun will be covered at the North Pole. Up to 80% of the sun will be covered in Russia. 70% of the sun will be covered in China, and then it drops down to 63% of the sun being covered in Norway. And finally, if you live in Finland, you will see that 62% of the sun will be covered. As you can see, people in these different countries will see very different eclipses from one another. Unfortunately, the next total eclipse will not be until 2024, so we'll have to settle for partial eclipses until then.